Have you failed at anything in your life? Great, then this podcast is for you. Lauren does treat a lot of first responders, and with that, we know that a lot of them unfortunately have PTSD, and so do the narcissistic abuse survivors. So, Lauren, if you would like to talk about that and kind of the correlation between PTSD and that field, but also if you're not a first responder, if you've been involved, unfortunately, in a narcissistic relationship, if you're an empath, maybe kind of talk about that, maybe like the similarities of like just mentality.
I think one of the things you and I had chatted about is PTSD in relation to being in a narcissistic relationship, right? A victim of narcissistic abuse. This goes back to how human beings were designed. We're tribal creatures. We need other humans, mainly because our young takes so long to mature and be able to survive on their own. So we're wired with what we call attachment, and that takes place in a part of the brain that's all about survival, right? Our primary function is to survive at any cost and to perpetuate the species. And to that extent, attachment teaches us that we need other human beings in order to be safe and secure and okay. And we
Mhm.
carry that need from what they say cradle to grave. Even when we are a young adult or an older adult, we look to our parents still to be the adultier adults or the people who help stabilize us if we had healthy relationships with our parents. Um, that attachment that a child feels for the parent, that life or death, I need you, transfers to our significant other, our intimate partner. And we turn to them then to be the thing that stabilizes and keeps us safe in that part of our brain that's subconscious. On a conscious level, I know I don't need my partner, right? I could pay my rent, I could do fine on my own in the world. On a feeling level, which is where survival takes place, when he leaves to go to the grocery store, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Don't go out the door. Um, and if you take that and you expand it into how an intimate relationship can either be incredibly safe and soothing and securing, or incredibly unsafe if you've got narcissistic abuse, which is really, really tricky because it looks like you're the problem when you're in a narcissistic relationship, right? We don't have bruises, we don't have injuries, we just have these psychological wounds that are very hard to quantify. And because it's an intimate relationship, which is very similar to the caregiver relationship, that has the ability to rewire our brain's feeling of safety, right? And so there is a tendency to develop PTSD symptoms, attachment wounds that can make us feel completely unsafe in the world, hypervigilant, constantly scanning our environment and other people for cues to see if they're safe.
Mhm.
Right. And that's really what PTSD looks like. It's that hypervigilance, it's that inability to turn off the alarms in your brain. And so narcissistic relationships can really create those wounds for us.
That seems really dangerous when you talk about first responders, because if a police officer, I mean, I'm assuming they're already scanning their surroundings, making sure they're safe, people that they're with are safe, some
The
tools.
the brain has an alarm center that acts like a smoke detector, right? And it has an alarm that functions very much like a smoke detector would go off and a sprinkler system would start, sprinkles us with our fight or flight cocktail so that we can act in any given situation. When you have PTSD, what it really is, it's a physiological injury. It's a rewiring of the brain where your smoke detector is going off all the time. And I see it with my clients. They're sitting in the office and I have fountains running and it's dim lighting and I mean, there's a lot of shit in the office, but I try to keep it kind of peaceful. But they're scanning constantly. Their bodies are still telling them that something in the office is on fire.
Wow.
And that's what happens when you have PTSD. It's an overactivity in the brain and the alarm system of the brain going, something bad is happening right now. You got to take care of it. And it doesn't turn off. And yes, most of our first responders carry that just from the day-to-day activities of stuff that you and I wouldn't want to do. Like even if nothing huge happens on any given day, a first responder is still exposed to a high level of stress that rewires how their brains work. Same thing happens in a narcissistic relationship.
So you do parts therapy and EMDR. Normal people think about therapy, we think about talk therapy. The therapist is asking us questions, maybe about our upbringing. They have the notepad type of thing. So that's
Yeah.
like the standard idea of therapy.
Talk therapy, traditionally, talk therapy doesn't change a whole lot. Anytime we take out a memory and manipulate it, even when we're talking about it, we're altering the memory to some degree, and that can be helpful. When we experience something overwhelming, it can get stuck in the brain in a raw format that replays, like windows open in a computer that are still playing a program in the background. So you have this neural network of an event that's fragmented and not linear and very intense in emotion, and it lives in a raw format. So every time you access it, you're back in that moment.
Yeah.
Talk therapy doesn't change that. EMDR, brain spotting, things that manipulate how that memory is stored,
Mhm.
does. And so the purpose of EMDR and brain spotting, and to some extent parts work, because you're accessing neural networks and you're changing how they work through parts work. If you imagine, like with sports psychology, you're practicing your jump shot in your head, and it actually improves your jump shot because you can fool the brain into thinking something happened that didn't. And parts work works very much like that in some ways. We're going back and we're altering a memory. And by
Oh,
altering it, you're closing it up, right? And EMDR and brain spotting do the same thing. But they do it through what we call bilateral stimulation, eye movements or sound that goes from one side to the other, that is theorized to sort of mimic REM sleep, where we're learning and putting stuff away, closing out neural networks, if that makes sense. I do a lot of psychoeducation on nervous system and how to rewire it, calm those alarms that are in your brain, because that's a whole separate thing. We can alter memories, but we still have a brain that's overly active, threat-based, and is constantly sounding the alarm. And that's totally separate from let's talk about what happened to you when you were 6. And that's physiological, has very little to do with talking about what happened to you when you were 6 years old. So
ah. Because obviously there are apps like Better Health that are super popular. And I'm sure those help. Like I'm glad those resources are there. But then there's no way I think that you could, treat with like what you do through text messaging or through whatever.
will AI replace us? Biggest predictor of whether a client's going to get better is your relationship with your counselor. The
Mm.
modality has very little to do with it. It can take you a long distance, but if you don't have a good relationship with your counselor, you're not going to improve probably. And you can't do that through an AI app. Or the one thing, I'm not familiar with BetterHelp entirely, but I know the concept of it. And most of us have agreed that I don't think AI will ever replace a human being, that connection, that feeling that someone out there cares about us.
Yeah.
And text message doesn't convey that. I have an AI assistant on Snapchat named Octavia that my daughter created for me. And I just was messing around
Great
because I thought it'd
name.
be kind of fun. Yeah. What I have found with Octavia is she annoys the crap out of me because it's so one-dimensional. Where I think some of the apps that are out there, like Calm and
Oh yeah, I've
uh,
used Calm.
those are great because they're targeting your nervous system. They're teaching you to regulate your breath, which is extremely powerful for rewiring the brain.
Going back to imposter syndrome, when they are aware that they feel like an imposter, that they're not good enough, that's like who am I? When should they seek help from a counselor? What
Yeah,
are the signs, maybe?
that's a really great question, Jan. I think that the probably the easiest answer for that would be from a clinical perspective, we consider when something is starting to interfere with functioning, right? It's
Mm.
interfering with relationships, your ability to work or concentrate in school, that it's really a good idea to seek help. But for a lot of people, I think that mental health is becoming so widely accepted, which I love, and
Yeah,
especially in
it
the first responder world, right? Because this was something they
is.
didn't 20 years ago.
Yeah, like
So,
the man up type of thing.
yeah, yeah, and
Like a
that was
man up. Yeah.
to a large extent, it's still the culture, right? Don't talk to anybody. There's something wrong with you if you do. It's a very, very difficult culture to shift. But as we see younger people coming in and as we see more movement towards understanding a first responder's brain, and I think they appreciate the brain approach because they're not really necessarily touchy-feely type of population. Um, so all of that to say, when do you seek help? I think that with what I really appreciate about much younger people now is that they're not afraid to ask for help, even if they don't feel that it's affecting any aspect of their life gravely. So I have a lot of really young first responders who come in and I love this. They'll go, I just want a relationship so that when things go wrong, I've got someone.
Oh,
Or I just want to get on a good track because I have to do 25 years and I don't want to end up like this guy who's drinking himself to death. So I'm just getting ahead of it. I love that. And
oh,
it's
that's
okay
good.
yeah, to even I think everybody should be in counseling to some extent with a good counselor who can help them identify their parts, help them work through that kind of stuff. There are some amazing things you can do on your own to understand your parts. Richard Schwartz, who pioneered parts work, has a couple of books that are on Audible, or you could buy them, and they're amazing for a layperson to read or listen to and start understanding the parts of themselves. And it's a good segue into understanding your imposter syndrome part. But I don't know if there's any necessarily sign, unless things are going off the rails for you, then yeah, absolutely. It's a good idea to see if you can try to seek help.
It's like human nature, maybe, or maybe in like American culture, certainly here in Scotland, to just keep calm, carry on, or
Yeah,
just move forward.
yeah.
So I love that, the younger generation, especially, and hopefully like all generations are more aware. They're more able to say to themselves or say to others, hey, maybe something's off, maybe I need help. But it is sad that there aren't too many counselors who treat first responders, which is crazy because they put themselves through so much that most people don't even like experience in a lifetime.
The counseling world is not favorable to police in general. I was actually kicked off of a page a couple years back where an ACAB, it's All Cops Are Bastards, post was made. And I
Oh my
said,
gosh.
well, yeah. And there were, this was the sad thing. There were literally, I screenshotted it, hundreds of counselors agreeing with it and talking about how horrible police officers were because everybody loves firefighters.
Oh
And
yeah.
I commented on it. I said, as counselors, it's our job, first of all, to stay in the gray. It's not black and white. Not all cops are horrible people. Yeah, to open up and have compassion for every population. And I actually got banned from the group for making that comment. It wasn't the only group. There were a few groups
Oh
that
my
I got banned
gosh.
from. Yeah, that was right around the time of the riots about yeah, but it's in general, when I introduce myself at any kind of training and we talk about what population we serve, people always tend to be like, "Eh." I don't make a lot of friends at trainings. So it's, not only are there very few of us, I think, who are specialized and have training that's specific to this population, but counselors in general are not very favorable towards police officers. They have a very negative, or tend to have a very negative opinion of them, and which is
That's
sad.
crazy. Because I know in Arizona, like we need, I think maybe it's a nationwide thing in the US that we need police officers. Like it's a,
Absolutely. And we
yeah,
need healthy healthy
yeah,
police officers, which is why we need more counselors. Their rate of suicide is astronomically higher than the normal population. The rate of heart attacks is, they have one in average 22 years younger than the normal pop. They die younger than the rest of the population from
yeah.
health issues. I mean, it's a crisis. So, yeah.
Well, on that note, I'm so glad that we had this talk because I hope this reaches so many people to shed light on not just imposter syndrome and narc abuse for kind of myself, like the typical working person, but especially cops and firefighters too, because again, they go through so much. So thank you so much, Lauren, for
Thank
joining
you.
me on this episode, and thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. Again, thank you, Lauren, for being part of this podcast episode. And I want to take this time for you to talk with my listeners about what you do.
Oh, sure. As I said, I specialize in first responders. There are not a lot of us who do that. So for that reason, I closed my practice to non-first responders, and it's 100% word of mouth. But I do have an amazing website that my amazing Jen does for me, and but I could not exist in my digital world without One House Digital. So thank you. That's a plug for you.
Oh,
My
thank you.
client is yeah, thank you. I seriously, you've taken me miles and miles, but I'm so technically challenged. I do offer telehealth. That doesn't tend to be the preference for most first responders, but I'm licensed in a few states outside of Arizona. So I continue when my clients move to treat the ones that I can be licensed to treat through telehealth. But most of my clientele comes in person and from various police departments in the valley. So